Meanwhile, a former U.S. intelligence chief has admitted Washington's backing of Islamist factions actually helped the rise of ISIL.
Who wasn't listening?
I think the administration.
The administration turned a blind eye to your analysis.
I don't know if they turned a blind eye. I think it was a decision. I think it was a willful decision.
A willful decision to go support an insurgency that had Salafists, Al-Qaeda, and Muslim Brotherhood.
A willful decision to do what they're doing.
The U.S. military said Monday it had airdropped small arms ammunition for Syrian rebel groups fighting the Islamic State. Citing U.S. defense officials, the U.S. TV network CNN said the U.S. military delivered 50 metric tons of ammunition to the rebels. 112 pallets were airdropped.
That Russia believes a big part of the United States arms supplies to the Syrian opposition will fall into the hands of terrorist groups.
The U.S.'s move comes barely 2 weeks after Russian airstrikes hit IS targets in Syria. Russia's entry could mean confrontation for the two super military powers. The U.S. wants to remove Syrian President Bashar al-Assad from power and is supporting the rebels as a result. But Putin has voiced his support for Assad. Russia's sudden military intervention sends a message that the two countries are once again competing in the Middle East. Many fear that the two powers' direct involvement in Syria could prolong the country's instability.
I do not quite understand how our American partners could criticize Russia's actions in fighting terrorism in Syria when they reject direct dialogue on a major issue of political settlement. I believe this position to be unconstructive, and it seems that the weakness of the American position in this case comes from the lack of any agenda on those issues. It looks like there's nothing to talk about. But nevertheless, we'll leave the doors open and hope for constructive dialogue with all participants of this complicated process, including our American partners.
We asked the U.S. on a military level to give us the targets, which they consider to be the terrorist ones for sure, 100%. But the answer was, no, we're not ready to do that. Then we thought and asked another question. Then could you tell us where we should not hit? Again, no answer. So what should we do? This is not a joke. I didn't make anything up.
Russian airstrikes against jihadi groups in Syria have been a boost to the government's army, and that has led to a craze for Russian President Vladimir Putin in the Middle East. To show their gratitude to Moscow, hundreds of Syrians gathered outside the Russian embassy in Damascus on Tuesday. They were holding photos of Putin as well as the Russian flag. They held placards that read, "Yes to Russian-Syrian cooperation," and "Thank you, Russia, thank you, Russia." Russia's Syria intervention is also welcomed in Egypt. TV anchor Ahmed Musa praised Russia's involvement. He said it's Russia, not the United States, that is truly fighting terrorism in Syria.
The U.S. troops in Afghanistan, who will now stay until after 2016. Almost 10,000 soldiers are set to remain in the country next year. The original intention had been to pull out all troops, excluding embassy-based soldiers. But now, 5,500 American military personnel will stay put in Afghanistan, even after Obama leaves office in early 2017. The news comes amid a surge in Taliban activity. Garneja Chakan reports.
President Obama's statement on the war with the Taliban 4 years ago now seems short-sighted.
Tonight, we take comfort in knowing that the tide of war is receding.
Our war in Afghanistan came to an end.
We are going to end combat operations in Afghanistan at the end of 2014. We would consider a train and advise mission that would extend beyond 2014.
By the end of next year, our war in Afghanistan will be over. America's war in Afghanistan will come to a responsible end. And by the end of this year, the transition will be complete, and Afghans will take full responsibility for their security, and our combat mission will be over.
I've decided that we will maintain our current posture of 9,800 troops through the end of this year.
Already, more than $1 trillion have been spent. It's caused the deaths of more than 90,000 people, and the Taliban in Afghanistan is the strongest it has been since 2001, according to the UN. Worse still, those extremists, not content with today's emboldened Taliban, are finding a terrifying new home by swelling the ranks of ISIL.
The Taliban members that are doing that are kind of disaffected with the Taliban because the groups are in conflict with each other there as well. So I think a situation is developing similar to Syria, only not of the same magnitude yet.
The groups in Syria that now comprise ISIL have been the driving force behind the insurgency there. Some even received support from the West and Gulf states for their fight against the Syrian government. In Libya, jihadists gained a foothold after longtime leader Muammar Gaddafi was removed, with the help of the US and NATO. In Yemen, al-Qaeda supporters have pledged allegiance to ISIL because al-Qaeda now seems too lightweight for them.
The same thing is true with Iraq. When you took off Saddam Hussein, you had no al-Qaeda in Iraq before the U.S. invaded. Al-Qaeda in Iraq was created to fight the U.S. Of course, it morphed into ISIS, which is even worse than al-Qaeda in Iraq. And al-Qaeda in Iraq was worse than the main al-Qaeda group. So it just gets worse.
The pattern is clear. ISIL incorporates extremist groups from many countries and flourishes where there is a security vacuum. And that puts Afghanistan front and center. The Taliban and ISIL had previously declared jihad on each other. But then in June of this year, the Taliban wrote an open letter to ISIL saying division between jihadists is not a good thing and suggested peace. Will the Taliban team up with ISIL, or will they eventually clash? One way or another, this could mean more violence in Afghanistan.
So when the Americans launch a bombing campaign to help Afghan forces fend off the Taliban offensive, is this a good thing or a bad thing? Is this an efficient way to do things?
Not at all. I have been from the very beginning against aerial bombardment of my country. And I have said repeatedly, and I will repeat myself again, that the war on terror is not in Afghan villages, it is not in Afghan cities, it is not in Afghanistan, that if we want to succeed against terrorism, we must go to the sanctuaries, we must go to the training grounds, we must go to those who finance them and support them. Unless we stop that, we are only causing harm to civilians in Afghanistan.
The head of the Atomic Energy Organization of Iran says the European Union is likely to formally announce the lifting of its anti-Iran sanctions next week. Ali Akbar Solehi said the removal of sanctions will be formally announced immediately after the EU approves the implementation of the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, most probably on Monday. He said the US president is also committed to simultaneously announcing the removal of part of its sanctions and the suspension of some others.
If, in fact, my argument is right, that this is the best way for Iran not to get a nuclear weapon, then that's not just good for the United States. That is very good for Israel.
This deal doesn't make peace more likely. By fueling Iran's aggressions with billions of dollars in sanctions relief, it makes war more likely. Just look at what Iran has done in the last 6 months alone, since the framework agreement was announced in Lausanne. Iran boosted its supply of devastating weapons to Syria. Iran sent more soldiers of its Revolutionary Guard into Syria. Iran sent thousands of Afghani and Pakistani Shiite fighters to Syria. Iran did all this to prop up Assad's brutal regime. Iran's proxy Hezbollah smuggled into Lebanon SA-22 missiles to down our planes and Yahoun cruise missiles to sink our ships. Iran supplied Hezbollah with precision-guided surface-to-surface missiles and attack drones so it can accurately hit any target in Israel. But don't think that Iran is only a danger to Israel. Besides Iran's aggression in the Middle East and its terror around the world, Iran is also building intercontinental ballistic missiles whose sole purpose is to carry nuclear warheads. Now remember this, Iran already has missiles that can reach Israel. So those intercontinental ballistic missiles that Iran is building, they're not meant for us. They're meant for you, for Europe, for America, for raining down mass destruction anytime, anywhere.
Russia's role in Syria has also propelled Iran's involvement in the country. A regional official and Syrian activists say Iranian and Hezbollah fighters have been pouring into Syria by the hundreds in recent days. It is the first confirmation of Iranian fighters taking part in Syrian combat operations. This comes just days after Iran test-fired a new long-range missile, potentially violating a UN agreement. Now the Iranian government is openly talking about a series of underground tunnels used to store missiles. This week, Iranian state TV aired footage of a secret missile base saying the missiles were ready to be fired in case of an attack on the country. The broadcast said the facility is one of hundreds of underground missile bases scattered across the country.
Iran has unveiled deep underground tunnels used as depots for long-range ballistic missiles. This is the first time that Iranian media are allowed there. Military officials say the tunnels are dug some 500 meters into high mountains. The commander of the Aerospace Force of Iran's Islamic Revolution Guards Corps, Brigadier General Amir Ali Hajizadeh, says that the missiles are only one trigger away from being launched in case of any threat against the Islamic Republic. Hajizadeh stressed that such bases lie beneath almost all Iranian cities. The IRGC general stressed that this is only part of Iran's military might.
Almost all Iranian cities have at least one missile base. What you see is like an iceberg floating on the water, some part of which is only visible. We have so many such bases that even if they manage to identify some of them, it still will be to no avail.
The Iranian military commander added that Tehran does not have any concerns over the enemy's state-of-the-art military and spying equipment. Hajizadeh noted that Iran, thanks to the efforts made by its defense forces, enjoys complete security while being surrounded by countries that are grappling with unrest and a conflict. IRGC commander says that Tehran is to launch a massive military drill in the near future.
نقطه‌ای از ایران اسلامی 500 متر زیر زمین، شهری است که حتی در خیال دشمن هم نمی گنجد. بیا با ما همسفر باش و نگاهی بیانداز گوشه‌ای از اقتدار دفاعی سپاهیان اسلام را.
من به ملت ایران قول میدم
آتشفشانی در اعماق زمین که اگر فوران کند خانمان سوز است برای هر بیگانه. تونل هایی که نوین ترین ماهواره ها و رادارهای جاسوسی را خسته می کند و حتی اگر هم شناسایی شود سردار ترسی از آن ندارد.
Joel, this is a fascinating read. Why the 12th Imam and why now?
Because it affects Iranian foreign policy right now. In other words, the leaders of Iran believe this is happening. They believe that this Islamic Messiah is coming, this 12th Imam, at the end of days, in the end of time, and that once he comes, either Israel and the United States, Judeo-Christian society as we've known it, will have already been destroyed, or that all the conditions for their destruction will be there, and then the Messiah will come and finish off the infidels and set up an Islamic one-world government.
Hezbollah's Secretary General has reaffirmed the Lebanese resistance movement's support for the Palestinian people's cause in their uprising. Sayyid Hassan Nasrallah hailed the ongoing protests against Israel in the occupied West Bank, saying the demonstrations show a third Palestinian intifada, or uprising, may begin. Nasrallah said the Palestinians must be supported by all possible ways.
It's arguably the most sensitive real estate on earth. The Temple Mount, the Haram al-Sharif as it's known to Muslims, is the epicenter of the long, bitter struggle between Israelis and Palestinians. In September 2000, then opposition leader Ariel Sharon went there under heavy security.
I came here to the holiest place of the Jewish people
His visit sparked violent clashes, which marked the beginning of the Second Intifada, known to Palestinians as the Aqsa Intifada, after the Aqsa Mosque, located on the Temple Mount. And once again, tensions there are fueling more violence, say young protesters in the West Bank. So why are you here today?
Because the Aqsa Mosque we need for us. The Aqsa is for us. So we will never forgive her.
It's here that Jews believe their holiest of holies, the Temple of Solomon, once stood. For Muslims, the Aqsa Mosque, which sits within the compound, is where they believe the Prophet Muhammad made a miraculous night journey from Mecca before ascending to heaven. When Israel conquered East Jerusalem in 1967, then Defense Minister Moshe Dayan pledged to maintain a strict separation, barring unofficially Jews from worshiping on the Temple Mount in what became known as the status quo. There are few places more emotive to Palestinians and Israelis, says former Jerusalem Deputy Mayor Meron Benvenisti.
Because it's the focal point of the conflicting views, or if you want, ideologies or narratives of both national movements.
Yusuf Nachi works for the Islamic Waqf, or endowment, that oversees the Haram al-Sharif. Underneath the anger over perceived changes to the status quo is a deeper issue.
It is the occupation which causes the frustration, which causes really the unrest of the Palestinians, and that to imagine that young people are ready to die for such a cause.
But the status quo is eroding. In recent years, Israeli authorities have allowed a growing number of Jews to tour the area, and right-wing Israeli politicians have insisted on the right of Jews to pray there. In July, an Israeli cabinet minister called for the building of the third temple on the Temple Mount. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu leads a shaky coalition dominated by hardliners, insists the status quo remains in place, and recently barred Israeli politicians and officials from going to the Temple Mount. Palestinian President Mahmoud Abbas has called for a non-violent protest against perceived Israeli attempts to change the status quo. And as leaders on both sides exchange accusations, more and even greater violence around the site is inevitable, warns Benvenisti.
This is something that is a ticking bomb. The question is how long you can postpone the explosion. And for that you need realistic, smart politicians. And I'm afraid I don't find them.
If this is the ticking bomb, what will the explosion look like?
Dozens of Palestinians have clashed with Israeli troops in Bethlehem in the West Bank. Well, protesters throwing stones at Israeli security forces there. They're responding in turn with stun grenades. In Jerusalem, an Israeli policeman shot and killed a Palestinian man suspected of premeditating a knife attack. An Israeli woman was also injured after being stabbed. Her attacker was shot dead. Let's look at the map. Violence has been breaking out almost daily since last week, mostly in Jerusalem. I think we can go to a map to show you where the latest events have been happening. The yellow dots, there. Yellow dots you can see on that map show where Israelis were stabbed to death. The blue dots, they're places, locations where Palestinians have been killed. In fact, if you total it up, at least 8 Israelis, 30 Palestinians have died since the start of October. So how's it got to this most recently? Let's recap. The region's worst violence began last month. A group of Palestinians, you may recall, that barricaded themselves inside the Al-Aqsa Mosque in Jerusalem's Old City. They're claiming the Israelis were trying to take over what is to them a sacred site. That's where it's all kicked off. Israel responded by deploying hundreds of police. Now then, those clashes and attacks have spread across the West Bank.
The Israeli government is introducing new measures to try and deal with the security situation, and among these is the call-up of hundreds of Israeli soldiers as reinforcements to police on the streets of Jerusalem. I'm at one of the entrances to the old city, and normally you would not see policemen standing around here. This is a makeshift metal detector that has also been put up here. The police are calling random people to come and have them walk through here. They're also checking the papers and the IDs of particularly people of Arab descent. Now, at the same time, at the entrances to many Arab neighborhoods here in East Jerusalem, roadblocks have been set up. The Israeli Security Cabinet also announcing that it will not return the bodies of people who carried out terror attacks against civilians will be destroyed within a week, and it will not return the bodies of those it has killed as a means of preventing them from being hailed as martyrs. The irony is that this might backfire. Critics say that in closing off Arab areas, you are merely perpetuating the anger and the violence from the grassroots. This so-called Third Intifada is a Palestinian uprising that comes from the ground. It is in being inspired and motivated on social media. Many of those carrying out attacks are youngsters.
This morning, escalating violence in Israel has many people living in fear. Israeli troops are clashing with protesters near Rachel's tomb in the West Bank following weeks of violent attacks. Palestinians threw firebombs at another site, which some believe is the tomb of Joseph in the West Bank. Smoke and fire poured from the stone structure. Jonathan Bigliotti is at Temple Mount in Jerusalem, where security forces are preventing some worshippers from entering. Jonathan, good morning.
Good morning. We're standing outside one of the key access points to the Al-Aqsa Mosque here in Jerusalem. Muslim prayer services have wrapped up for the afternoon. Hamas has called for a day of rage following prayers, and now Israeli officials and guards are on heightened alert, concerned Palestinian protests could turn into violence. The last day of rage was on Tuesday, sparking 4 separate attacks on Israelis and clashes between Israeli security and Palestinian youth. Already overnight in the West Bank, Israeli defense officials say dozens of Palestinians set fire to Joseph's tomb, a sacred Jewish site. The Al-Aqsa Mosque itself has been at the heart of recent violence after rumors Israeli officials wanted to limit access to Palestinians. In the last 3 weeks, Palestinians have attacked Israelis at least a dozen times, in most cases using knives. Israelis say they have no other option but to defend themselves. And Jerusalem's mayor has called on Israeli citizens with gun permits to carry out their weapons in public. Palestinian President Mahmoud Abbas has condemned the torching of that tomb in the West Bank. He has called for peaceful resistance. Israeli guards, meanwhile, are patrolling on foot and also on horseback as they try to prevent any violence.
Almost 2 weeks of lone wolf attacks, and once again, Jerusalem is on edge. Daily, city residents either witness scenes like these or see them on TV. For those who lived through previous waves of violence, there's a sense of déjà vu.
I remember riding on the buses then, and it's a similar feeling as now. It's almost like we're looking like this around us more, not knowing if that really would help, but just more conscientious of when we're walking, when we're talking. Like right now, I'm more aware with my peripheral vision.
Sharon Gat served in the Israeli Special Forces for more than 20 years and now runs a company providing weapons training for security guards and ordinary people.
The civilians that come over here are under a lot of pressure. People want to protect themselves, protect their families. They feel they can not walk without a weapon in the streets because the attack can come from anywhere.
The Israeli government has made it easier for citizens to obtain weapons licenses. Less lethal means of defense are available, but they're selling out. Alon, do you have any pepper spray?
No, I don't have. It's empty.
All sold out?
Sold out. Don't have it in Israel now. Maybe next week, maybe. You can open it and you can if something attack you. Spiky? It's a self-defense tool. It's good for women, for girls. It's cheap and it's very easy to use with this.
What language? En français, monsieur. So 1, 2, 3. Yeah.
I wanted to feel more confident in myself and that I could defend myself and protect myself.
Alors, salut. Bonjour. Today we're going to talk a lot about more techniques, defenses against knives.
Hand-to-hand combat, in Hebrew Krav Maga, self-defense. October registration has tripled. Tonight's focus?
What was this? Boom.
Fending off knife attacks.
Right? So I need to know how to hit.
Fear of being attacked is widespread among Israelis, which is why this Facebook retailer sold out of pepper spray within hours of posting his ad. Most assaults happen at bus stops in crowded city centers. Weapon-wielding attackers charge suddenly, or in this case, plow into pedestrians waiting for the bus. The result? Pervasive anxiety and fear that people are trying to overcome via action.
Meanwhile, the IDF bolstered security in Jerusalem as Friday prayers were in progress, fearing more unrest after a spate of attacks in the region. Well, on the political front, Palestinian leaders are calling on the Mideast Quartet, the group tasked with mediating peace in the region, to visit the trouble spots. The Palestinian ambassador to Russia said in a statement that it's high time the quartet got acquainted with the situation to determine who is responsible. Meanwhile, the UN Security Council has just wrapped up an emergency session in which both the Israeli and Palestinian envoys outlined their positions.
We come to you today asking you to urgently intervene to end this aggression against our defenseless Palestinian people and against our shrines, which are subjected to violations by the Israeli military occupation and by the Israeli settlers and by extremists.
As we sit here today, Israel is facing an onslaught of terrorism. Men, women, and children are being stabbed to death on the street on a daily basis. Yet for them, there has been no demand for an emergency session of the Security Council, no call for the Palestinian leadership to stop their incitement, and not even a whisper of condemnation of these acts could be heard from this council.
في هذه الأيام الصعبة التي تصعد فيها إسرائيل حكومة إسرائيل الهجوم الشديد على الشعب الفلسطيني في كل مكان، وبصراحة لا ندري لذلك سبب، لأن الجانب الفلسطيني لم يعتدي ولم يقم بأي عمل ضد الإسرائيليين. إذا كانوا يعتقدون أن الناس في القدس تقف للدفاع عن نفسها فهذا حقنا. نحن يجب أن ندافع عن مقدساتنا جميعا الإسلامية والمسيحية. أما أن يفكروا بتقسيم الأقصى فهذا أمر بعيد المنال ولا يمكن أن يتحقق لهم. نحن نقول لهم لا نريد تصعيدا عسكريا ولا أمنيا بيننا وبينكم. لا نريد هذا، لا نريد هذا. قلناها بالفم المليان، وكل تعليماتنا إلى أجهزتنا وإلى تنظيمنا وإلى شبابنا وإلى جماهيرنا، نحن لا نريد التصعيد، لكن كمان نريد أن نحمي أنفسنا. يعني عندما تأتي قبيلة مجموعة من المستوطنين وتهاجم قرية، ماذا سيكون ردنا عليها؟ كيف سيرد عليها؟ ابعدوا عنا، نحن لسنا الذين نبدأ، نحن لسنا الذين نبادر، وعلى إسرائيل أن تتوقف وأن تقبل اليد الممدودة لها للآن. تتصاعد هذه الأيام الهجمة العدوانية الإسرائيلية على شعبنا الفلسطيني وأرضه ومقدساته، وتطل العنصرية العنجهية بوجهها القبيح لتزيد الاحتلال بشاعة وقبحا وبشكل يهدد السلام والاستقرار وينذر بإشعال فتيل صراع ديني يحرق الأخضر واليابس ليس في المنطقة فحسب بل ربما في العالم.
Speculation over a new Palestinian uprising or intifada has been growing, and now militants in the West Bank say they're ready to end the truce with Israel that's been in place since last year's war that left 2,100 Palestinians dead.
The brigades promise the wounded and the martyrs that they will remain ready to fire until the freedom of the prisoners and of Jerusalem is achieved from the Zionist occupiers.
An international body to protect the Palestinian people is now a vital necessity due to the continuation of Israeli aggression and their breach on the Palestinian people and their national rights.
Nabila Arabi was speaking at an emergency meeting of the Arab League in Cairo, where permanent members deplored Israeli violence. A final statement said that they are considering taking legal action against Israel. Participants also agreed to find ways to block the Judaization policies of Israel and Jerusalem al-Quds. Meanwhile, head of the Palestine Liberation Organization, Saab Erekat, told reporters that new petitions will be sent to the International Criminal Court against Israel for its crimes against Palestinians.
The Palestinian Commission in charge of the ICC file will provide information about the crimes that are committed against our oppressed people. The responsibility for what is in the files and will be presented will be placed on the Israeli Prime Minister, his Minister of Military Affairs, and the Israeli security forces.
The senior Palestinian official accused Israel of committing field executions, collective punishment, and ethnic cleansing against Palestinians.
هي فرصة أولا للعاملين في الأجهزة الأمنية والله أن يبيضوا تاريخهم الذي اسود بما حدث في طوال أكثر من 8 سنوات أو يزيد. هي فرصة أن يمحوا الذنوب التي علقت بهم بجهادهم وبحمل بنادقهم تجاه العدو. وكما قلت الأجهزة الأمنية ممتلئة بالأسلحة، المراكز الأمنية ممتلئة بالأسلحة. هي فرصة أن تؤخذ هذه الأسلحة ليذاق اليهود ألوانا من العذاب بالسلاح الذي أعطوه للسلطة الفلسطينية، بالسلاح الذي أعطوه حتى يحارب الشعب الفلسطيني، بسلاحهم سنقتلهم إن شاء الله تعالى.
הישיבה הזאת לזכרו של רחבעם זאבי.
Israel will come clean with the murderers, with those who try to murder, and all those who assist them. We will use with no hesitation all means at our disposal in order to bring back calmness to the cities of Israel. I tell the chairman of the Palestinian Authority, don't turn murderers into heroes, and if there is a deterioration as a result of this incitement by Hamas, the Islamic movement, and the Palestinian Authority, you will be held responsible.